Hey guys, we're going to take care of two birds with one stone today. One, we're going to be learning about the brush care fundamentals, which is listed out over here. And two, while we're learning about this, we're going to create a little exercise over here where you're going to learn how to mix secondary colors as well as tertiary colors. Okay, let's start with these brush care fundamentals. I'm always going to have them in this video on the side over here, but let's take a look at them a little closer here. So reading through these, there's 5 things you should remember always to do while painting. And then there's 5 steps of what you should be doing after painting. So firstly, while painting, these are the 5 rules. Dip the bristles, not the metal. Okay, here's what I mean by that. You got your brush over here. When you dip it into your paint, you want your brush bristles, the hairs of the brush, to touch the paint. You don't want to dip it so deep that the metal ferrule over here is dipping into the paint, particularly when you're dipping into like larger pools of paint. Okay, so I'll show you what not to do and what to do. So this is what not to do. You just dunk your brush all the way in, you just kind of swirl it around, it kind of gets everywhere. This will both damage your brush over time because the paint's getting into the ferrule, and it'll also leave you with very little control over how much paint is on the bristle. So this is what not to do. I'm going to get as much of this off of there as I can. I'll show you what to do. Get this washed off. The excess paint off. What you want to be doing instead of dipping with that hard kind of dunk is just dip the very far tip of the brush, just the tip of the bristles. A little bit goes a long way. Even just a touch right there, that's about what you want. Easy to control. You don't really ever want it to be ever past the halfway point, okay, of the bristles right here. Okay, so that's rule number 1 right there. Dip the bristles, not the metal. Rule number 2, if you notice, I have 2 water cups. Use 2 water cups, one for rinsing on the left, one for re-wetting on the right. Rinsing is just that. I'm only using this water when I want to rinse off the paint that's on the bristles of my brush. In this case, the yellow. I don't want it there anymore. Okay. After you rinse, you want to be dabbing your brush onto the rag like you see me doing over here to get the excess moisture off. And in the case where the brush is a little too dry, right, you've kind of maybe waited a bit long, this clear water over here is just for dipping into, right, to re-wet the brush before you dip it into a different color, in this case blue. Okay, which takes us to the 3rd rule. You want to rinse the brush every time you switch colors. Every time. Okay, this will help you in so many ways, but let's say I've got this blue and I'm kind of doing some painting with it, right? Just watch along. You don't have to follow along. Let's say, and then after I got the blue, let's say, oh, you know what? I want to start working with some yellow. The moment my brush touches the yellow, part of that yellow is going to get muddied up. It's going to start changing colors both on the palette, and when I try to put down the yellow, it's not yellow, is it? It is slightly green. Okay? So every time you switch colors between any color, here's what you want to do. Rinse the brush in the cup that's only meant for rinsing, in my case the left. Really swish the brush around there. Get the brush dried off to the point where you don't see any more paint coming off on that rag, right? And you can do this with paper towels as well. Once you verify that the brush is dry, then you dip it into the new color, right? that'll do two things. It'll enable you to get a fresh new color, in my case yellow, and it'll prevent this pool of paint from getting muddied up. Now I can't really use this little corner, right? Because it's got a little bit of blue in it, it turns slightly green. So really important rule while painting. You want to rinse the brush every time you switch colors. So number 4, when not in use, lay the brush flat on a rag. Do not store the brush in a water cup. It's a really common practice for some reason for students to just take their water cup, I'll just put it in this one, and just dip their brush in there and just store it for a long time whenever they're not using it. Really, really bad habit for multiple reasons. Mainly, over time, when you just dunk and store your brush like that, it'll start to uncouple the adhesive that's holding the bristles in this ferrule, this metal ferrule. Okay, so it damages your brush. You're essentially what my art teacher would call a brush killer. If you just leave your brush like that, don't ever do that, please, please. When the brush is not in use, firstly, make sure there's no more paint on it. You rinse it off. Make sure there's no more paint coming off here. Just lay it flat. Okay, I like to lay it flat on my rag. You can do the same with your paper towel. So that's the 4th rule. When not in use, lay the brush flat on a rag. Do not store it in any one of these, like especially brush head down. Don't store it like that. 5th and final rule. You want to use light pressure, meaning when you're actually painting with the brush, the ferrule, meaning the metal part, should never touch the paper. This isn't a pencil, okay? The way you use a pencil is with a lot of pressure, okay? You got to get the lead kind of exploding on the paper, different with a brush. Here's how not to do things. Even if you have the right amount of paint on the brush, I see some people kind of just really just going at it. A lot of pressure to the point where the form of the brush is off, and even the metal part, this ferrule is starting to touch the paper. No, that's not how you paint. Okay, please. Light pressure, slow, methodical strokes. Instead of really pounding down on the bristles like that, you just need a little bit of paint. One slow, small portion at a time. Okay? Light pressure. And the shape of the bristles should never really be compromised. Okay? So those are the 5 things to remember while painting as far as brush care fundamentals go. And you know, it's really the fundamentals of putting colors down with paint. All right. This over here, not exactly anything intentional, so I'm going to flip it over. Let's flip it over on the other side. Okay. I said this is a 2 bird, 1 stone kind of thing. So these 5 fundamentals you're going to actually put into practice by creating a diagram where at the top you're going to have primary colors, second row you're going to have secondary colors, and then tertiary colors on the 3rd row. Okay, this is going to be especially helpful for those of you who have never mixed colors before. So follow me step by step. All the while, I am going to remind you guys of which one of these rules to keep in mind. Okay? All right. Let's start with the primary colors. The primary colors are red, yellow, and blue. Make sure your brush is clean of any either soap residue if it was pointed by a previous student, or if like in my case, you were painting something, make sure there's no more excess, there's no more paint left over in the brush by rinsing it in the rinsing cup and then dabbing it off on your rag or paper towel. If it's a little too dry after the drying process, dip it just a tiny bit into the clean water cup, and then let's grab some red. So right here, I am dipping the bristle, not the metal, keeping the paint just on the tip of my paintbrush. And right over here, you can paint out just a small red square. It's about that large. You might be working on a slightly different size paper. Just make it work for the substrate you're working on, okay? The paint that I'm using right now is tempera, okay? There's a couple advantages to this. One of them being it's really easy to clean. So here's my square of red. It doesn't have to be a perfect square. I want to do yellow next. However, third rule, I need to rinse the brush every time I switch colors. There's a little bit of red left over on the brush. I need to rinse it off in my rinsing cup thoroughly. Till the point where when I touch the brush to the rag or the paper towel, there's no more pigment coming off of it. It's clean. And then I can dip it into the yellow paint. Right about the middle of the paper, put down a similar or the same size square of yellow. The third square that I'm putting down is going to be blue. Again, third rule, rinse the brush every time you switch colors. So I'm going to rinse off all of my yellow. The more times you switch, you'll notice that the water gets muddier and muddier. At some point, when there's too much pigment inside of that cup, that rinsing cup, you're going to want to change the water out. This water is never used for rinsing. It's only used for re-wetting, just like that, just a dab. Okay. Now that my brush is clean of any previous paint, I can grab a tiny bit of blue. Let's make a square of blue. So that's the first layer I put down. I'm noticing it's a little too translucent. No worries. I can grab a tiny bit more blue, add a little more paint for a second layer. These are the primary colors. So we're going to do some labeling with a pencil, so I'm not going to need the brush for a moment. Fourth rule, when not in use, lay the brush flat on a rag. Do not store it in one of these water cups. Okay, so firstly, let's rinse it off of any blue. In the rinsing cup, make sure there's no more color coming off over here on the rag. Lay it flat. Do not dunk it in either one of these, please, please. So let's do some labeling. These are our primary colors. Okay, the primary colors are red, yellow, and blue. We're going to move on to our secondary colors. So write secondary nice and large like that. That's going to be our second row. Here's where it gets more fun. The way you mix secondary colors and create them, they come from the primaries. Okay? Red and yellow, when they get put together, let's see what happens. So this isn't a rule written over here, but a good practice when you're mixing colors is to start with the lighter one. Between red and yellow, the yellow is much lighter in terms of value. So we're going to start there. On your mixing palette, right, yours is going to look different, but make do with yours. Choose an area that's clear. Get a small amount of the yellow and then transfer it into that empty space. Now again, I'm going to get some red here, but before I do that, I need to wash off this brush. Okay, number 3, rinse the brush every time you switch colors. You'll notice you have to rinse the brush quite a lot, even when you're not applying direct paint onto the paper, even when you're mixing, all right? So I've got a bit of yellow here. I've washed off the residue of yellow, and just grab the tiniest bit of red, okay? It's very easy to overpower the yellow you've put down here. And then watch what happens when you mix up that bit of red with that bit of yellow. As you mix it, you should notice it changing colors into orange. If this is your first time doing this, congratulations. You just created a secondary color out of two primaries. Okay? So in between, in the middle of the red and yellow, let's put down a square of orange. One thing I forgot to mention, as you mix the orange, as necessary, you want to mix in more yellow or more red as needed. It wants to look pretty even, right? Not too yellow so that it's yellow-orange, not too red so that it's in the red-orange side of things. Okay? So let's wash off our brush now that we're done with the painting the orange square. Make sure it's clean on the rag and then lay it flat. We got two more mixtures. Let's go with yellow and blue. Again, it's a good idea to start with the lighter color, in this case yellow. Blue is much, much darker. With a clean brush, dip into the yellow, find a free space right over here I'm going to choose. Get a couple dabs of yellow in there. Now again, I'm switching colors to the blue. I am not going to dip my brush in there with all this yellow on it. It's going to muddy it. I need to wash it off and rinse it off in the rinsing cup. Might need to do that a couple times for it to show up as clean on the rag. And again, like I did with the red, because the blue is so much darker, it easily overpowers the yellow. Just grab a tiny bit to start with. You can always add more later. When you add blue to yellow and let those two mix, you end up with green. Look at that. So good example here of things being a little too much on the yellow side. I'm seeing more of a yellow-green here. I have this yellow-green on my brush. I want a tiny bit more blue, but we got to be strict about this. I don't want to dip it in here. Because this is a different color, I need to rinse it off. Okay, going back to that third rule, it's probably the rule that you're gonna want to be most mindful of most often. Whenever you switch colors, rinse off the brush. I want to just a touch more blue on there, right? Mix that in. That's a little better. Next to the orange over here, between the yellow and the blue, just about, let's paint in a square of green. And again, if this is your first time mixing colors, congratulations again. You just created a whole new color out of two other primaries. Rinse off your brush. There's a third secondary that we're going to mix up, and that's the mixture between red and blue. It's debatable which one to start with first. It also kind of depends on the paint. In this case, as far as what I can tell, the red is slightly lighter, so we're going to start with that. Make sure your brush is clean. get a couple dollops of red and transfer it into an open area on your palette before I dip into the blue. Again, rule number 3, I rinse it off. Make sure it's clean. Get a small amount of blue to mix into the red. And when you mix red with blue, what you create is violet, more commonly known as purple. But we call it violet because it actually flows better when we start getting into the names of the tertiary colors. Okay. So that's a little more on the red side. I want a little more blue, but before I dip into the blue, again, I'm rinsing the brush before I switch the colors. Just a touch more blue, maybe a little more than that. Mix that in. That's a little better. And then let's paint the violet. We're done with the brush momentarily. Rinse it off. Lay it flat. That's the 4th rule. Let's label these secondary colors. We have orange, green, violet. And you can draw these diagrammatic lines to indicate how each one is created. For instance, orange comes from mixing red and yellow. Green comes from mixing yellow and blue. Violet, on the other hand, comes from mixing blue. And this one's a little tricky. Let's kind of loop it around over here. But it comes from mixing blue and red together. All right, so this will be a useful diagram for you to take a look at whenever you need a reminder. Now, tertiary colors. Tertiary colors come from mixing secondaries with primaries. Okay, they're kind of in between colors. So orange is more or less an even mixture of red and yellow. The way you get a tertiary color is by mixing that orange, say with a red, and you end up with a red-orange. Okay, so it's going to be orange with a touch more red into it. Enough for it to be noticeable. And there's going to be 6 of these guys. All right? Okay, so let's get into this. Red and orange together. I have a tiny bit of orange left over here, but not quite enough. So the mixing process is the same. You still start with the lighter color, which in this case is yellow. Get some small dollops of yellow onto the side. Wash off that brush before dipping into the red. My water is getting extra muddy. At this point, I would change it out if I wasn't recording. I'd recommend you change it out too, but I'm going to keep going for the video's sake. I have a good amount of yellow. Here's what we'll do. I'm actually going to start with the yellow-orange because it's going to be more practical. Because for the red-orange, all I really need to do is mix in a little bit more red into the mixture. But let's start with the lighter stuff. So let's go with the yellow-orange first. Okay, so start with the yellow. Just the tiniest bit of red is what you need. So it's mostly yellow and only a very, very small amount of orange, of red, I mean. So you see how easy it was for that red to overpower the yellow already? I need a whole lot more yellow. But since I have that orange on my brush, I'm going to wash it off, dab it off on the rag, and let's grab a bunch more yellow to mix in here. A bunch more because when you're mixing lighter colors, like yellow into a darker color, like orange or red, it takes more of it. It takes a lot more of it to get the same effect. So I have a pretty good yellow-orange right there. Somewhere in the middle of these guys, let's put a smaller dollop of yellow-orange. It's a light color in general. It might be kind of translucent, but that's all right. To produce red-orange out of that, first we need to wash our brush, and I'm just going to mix in a little bit more red into the mix, okay, to the point where it's more red than this base orange, but not fully red. So right there, it's just about all I really need. And that's a good red-orange. Kind of looks like ketchup. Okay, so here's orange, noticeably more yellow, noticeably more red. Those are our first two tertiary colors. Let's move on to the others. First, washing off your brush. Let's move on to, see, we did the orange plus red, we did the orange plus yellow. Let's get the yellow plus green, and then the blue plus green. Okay, yellow plus green is going to get us yellow-green. Make sure your brush is clean. Dip it into the clean water if you need some moisture. Grab an area that's free. I might need to refill my yellow a bit. Okay, because I'm using all of it right now. So I'm starting with the yellow. I don't have a lot of it. I'm going to grab the tiniest drop of blue I can possibly manage. Okay, make sure your brush is clean by rinsing it off and drying it. The tiniest drop of blue I can manage. And then I'm going to mix it in here, starting at the corner. And here's a green that's noticeably more yellow than the base green we got here, yellow-green. Rinse off the brush. I'm just going to grab a tiny bit more of that blue to add it in here in order to create the blue-green. Okay. Just a little more blue. Mix it in there. Really easy to overpower. Just got to watch it. And let's see. No, I need a little bit more blue. Just a little bit more. I have a little too much moisture on my brush. It's starting to make things a little translucent, but for this practice piece, that's more, it's okay. You can kind of work with it. So this little, let me move my arm so you can see. This little bit of blue-green should be noticeably more blue than the green. Yellow-green, noticeably more yellow. Okay. Got a couple more. We want to try out the blue-violet, and then finally the red-violet. Okay. So let's start with, let's start with the blue-violet. I've already got a good amount of this violet over here. So what I'm going to do with a clean brush is grab a little bit more blue and add it in to this small portion of it. That looks about right. So what you put down here should be visibly more blue, and also, if you're using the same kind of paint, visibly much darker than the violet, the base violet that you started with over here. Okay. Now let's get ourselves the last tertiary color, which is red plus violet, which gives us red-violet. So I got this base of violet over here. I'm going to grab a bunch more red, because again, it's the lighter color. It's going to take a little more of it to overpower and mix in and get the result we want. You want a violet that leans more toward the side of red. And I think that's about right. It wants to be noticeably more red than what we got over here. It's probably a little too much red. If you find yourself in a similar spot, kind of overpowered it a little too much, wash off your brush, get it fairly dry, but make sure it's clean of any previous paint. Get a bit more blue. And sometimes you can mix it right onto the paper. I'm going to get rid of that excess blue. I grabbed a little too much. And just with a clean dry brush, I'm going to see what happens when I mix that blue into that mostly red situation I got here. And that's a little better. So still violet, but noticeably more red than the base. Still violet, but noticeably more blue. And there you have all the primaries, secondaries, and tertiary colors you need to put together what we're going to do next in terms of the color wheel. But let's finish labeling these. The labeling system for tertiary colors is the primary name goes first and then the secondary. So this over here is red dash orange. This over here, primary goes first. What the primary name is yellow dash, and it got mixed in with the secondary orange. Right over here is yellow green, blue green, blue violet, red violet. And what I mentioned before about why we call this violet, it's a little awkward phonetically, or just it's a little awkward to say blue purple or red purple. It flows a little better to say blue violet or red violet. Okay, so that's kind of, at least as far as I understand it, the reasoning behind some of these alternative names. Now this is optional. It might kind of get into a confusing mess, but you can add some of these lines to indicate how these tertiary colors are created. Red-orange comes from red and orange. Yellow-orange comes from yellow and orange. It might be a little redundant to do this because the mixture is really embedded into the name, right? But if you really want to keep going with it, I'm fine with it, you know? Okay, Thanks for bearing with me with that. This next part, we're going to look at what to do after you're done painting. Okay, and this is mainly done at the sink. You're going to see me do it at the table, but you'll have the advantage of working at the sink. Firstly, this isn't brush care, but you want to wash off the palette over here, get it ready for the other students to use. Okay, so that's something you're going to do at the sink. Just make sure all the colors are fresh off of there. Set this aside. Your work needs to go on the drying rack, right, to fully dry. And what you want to do is take your brush to the sink. Okay. Step one is you're going to add a small amount of soap into the palm of your hand. So I'm going to wet my hand a bit. I got my bar of soap over here. For you, you're probably going to have access to the school's, soap dispenser, but you just want some soap in the palm of your hand. Step two, you're going to rinse the brush. We're still on step one. With that soap in your palm, swirl your brush into the palm of your hand with that soap in it. Okay, right in the center. I probably want a little bit more soap. Okay, just swirl, swirl, swirl. You'll see some of the color rubbing off. That's what you want to see. Okay, and then step two, rinse the brush with water. Repeat that previous step with swirling the brush in your palm with soap until there's no more paint, there's no more color coming off of that brush. Okay? So that's a brush right now that's free of any kind of paint. There's no more paint on my hand. Okay? Now, step three is where you start to point the brush. This is a really important step. Okay, the brush is clean, but the bristles, they're going to fray over time without doing this. Number three says add a small amount of shampoo into your palm and swirl the brush into it. There's other products for this that are much better, more appropriate, and also more expensive. Shampoo, and even, some like mild soaps, they're fine, in my opinion. Just a small dab, that's a little too much, right? You're going to swirl the brush into the shampoo, but you're not going to wash it off. Okay, swirl the brush into the shampoo until it reaches all the way up, close to the ferrule, the metal ferrule. I'm going to wash my hand off a bit here. And your brush is going to be nice and frothy like this. Okay, you want it to be frothy because that's how you know that the shampoo's reached all the little bristles inside too. And then, number four, you're going to shape the brush into a point by gently working the bristles over a rag. You can do this with a paper towel too. Take your brush, run it this way onto the rag, twirl the brush a bit, run it over the rag, twirl, run, twirl, run, until you form, to the best of your ability, the sharpest point you can get. Okay? Do this gently, you're not pressing hard at all. Now, this brush I'm using, I've used and abused over the years, so you're not going to see a very sharp point come out of it, unfortunately. But still, pointing it like this is still going to help to increase the longevity of it, right? Finally, you want to store the pointed brush upright to dry. There's going to be some empty cups that are available for you. Just put it in there. Oh, that's not going to stand. My brush is a little too long for that. If you can't make it stand, you could just lay it flat somewhere, okay? Let that dry. It is going to harden, right? And that hardening shampoo is what's going to protect the shape of the brush over time. Okay. That took a little while. Thanks for sticking with it. Those are the brush care fundamentals combined with an exercise for getting the primaries, secondaries, and tertiaries painted down. Okay? Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys in class.